Well, good evening, everyone. The H1B Guy here, and today, the H1B Guy live on August 24th, 2023, with members from Improve the Dream. Today, we'll introduce you to a few more documented dreamers. We'll get an update on advocacy that's been going on at Improve the Dream, touch on the America's Children's Act, and hear about a bunch more. But before we get started, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't already, to please subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube and like this video so that I can continue to produce more content like this for you. I also wanted to mention the H1B Guy offers a variety of consulting services. I help businesses and individuals solve complex work authorization issues in the recruitment process while bringing awareness to employment-based immigration benefits. If I can help you, please reach out. I'd love to hear how. And you can book an appointment directly with me via the h1bguy.com. Today's live stream is brought to you by Syndesis and Path to Canada, the ideal plan B for high-skilled immigrants currently located in the U.S. whose status may be uncertain. By perm-ads.com, the industry leader in providing a seamless experience for employers and immigration attorneys navigating the complex perm recruitment ad phase of the labor certification process. And by Mob Squad. Are you a technology professional facing U.S. work visa-related challenges? Don't leave your fate up to chance. Our partner Mob Squad has a solution. Join the squad. Well, tonight is officially the 7th live stream where I've been joined by documented dreamers from Improve the Dream, and the 8th time total that members from Improve the Dream have been featured here on the H1B Guy channel. For those of you who are not aware, Improve the Dream is an organization led by young immigrants who've grown up in the United States as child dependents on long-term visa holders without a clear path to citizenship. They bring awareness to the 200,000 plus documented dreamers while advocating for change that permanently ends aging out and provides a path to citizenship for every child who grows up in the United States, regardless of status. So a really quick call to action, and that is, if you have a documented dreamer, if you are the parent of a legal childhood arrival, one thing that we'd like to ask you to do is, either for yourself or for the documented dreamers, have them go to improvethedream.org. And from there, they can complete a survey, and members from Improve the Dream will be in touch. But tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing 3 new documented dreamers that have not been on the channel before, as well as Deep Patel, who many of you already know. But first and foremost, Mohil, very nice to have you on. If you'll just give a quick intro of yourself, and you're currently in New Jersey, and you've been in the U.S., I believe, since you were 2 years old, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Muhel. I'm a documented dreamer. So as Rob mentioned, I first came to the U.S. when I was just 2 years old with my family, and then we relocated back to India for a few years. And since then, I've lived in Illinois, and then finally moved to New Jersey when I was 11 years old. So I grew up here on a H-4 dependent visa, since my dad was on an H-1 work visa. And a few years ago, my parents and my brother received their green cards, but I aged out because I turned 21 years old. So therefore, I was not eligible to receive my green card. I went to pharmacy school at Rutgers University, and I graduated last year. And after I graduated, I worked at a research company on my OPT, which is your optional practical training. And then my company applied for the H1B work visa lottery, but unfortunately, I was not selected in both rounds. And also, STEM doesn't qualify, pharmacy doesn't qualify under STEM, so I was not eligible for any type of work extension. So I only had 2 options, which was one, to self-deport, which means having to leave my family and leave the country that I've been calling home for so long. And my second option was to go back to school. So for the time being, my plan is to pursue a master's, just so that I can continue to stay here with my family for a few more years. Thank you.
So 19 years in the U.S. plus, right? I think that's the
Yeah,
thing
almost 2
about,
decades, like give or
yeah.
take. There was a gap where I was in India in between, but yeah. for most of my life.
Almost 20 years here in the US and still fighting for legal status. And
Hmm.
that's, I think we'll continue to highlight your story, but I think that's the one thing about you that we've talked about a lot on the channel. We've had folks that from really relatively infant to 2 years old come on the channel and um, 2 decades, right? And when I say it out loud, it's almost unimaginable that here you are still fighting for status. I want to move on to Mary, and Mary, you are currently in Utah, and I believe that you originally came to the US. You were a little older, but are somewhere around 11, if I'm remembering correctly. If you can maybe share a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So, a slightly different story from Hill, but sort of a similar predicament that we both now are in. I was born in India, but grew up in Singapore until about the age of 10. And that's when we found out that my dad was recruited to join a company in Lehi, Utah. So ultimately, my family and I moved to Utah around 2009, and we've been here since. I was right at the cusp of 10, about to turn 11 when we moved here. And I remember kind of when we were brought here, we never imagined that, I and my family would still be waiting in line to have a permanent status here in this country. We knew that, the green card process, an arduous one, but we never anticipated that nearly a decade later, we would still be waiting in line. And as a result,
Mhm,
I've now aged out because I'm older than 21. Um, so I grew up in Utah since we've been here. I went to high school here, went to the University of Utah for undergrad, studied biomedical engineering and psychology. And around that time, there were some like personal health challenges and family members who got sick. And so I really got a close sense of how the American healthcare system worked and was really inspired by some of the doctors and healthcare workers that treated my family members and wanted to pursue medicine. And so around my junior year of college, I was looking into the pre-med path, but didn't know if that would be something I could pursue just because it's really hard for students who are on a visa to get
mhm,
into um, American med schools. And so around that time is also when I found out that I would have to change my visa. Up until that point, I was on an H4 dependent visa of my dad's
mhm,
H1B visa. However, my junior year of college, I remember kind of sitting down with my family and realizing that, I'd be turning 21 soon and no longer could stay on this visa. But I hadn't finished my degree, I hadn't completed my bachelor's. And in order to, enroll in my spring semester classes, I needed to figure out a way to change my status and get an international F1 student visa. That's the visa that, students who are coming from foreign countries for the first time to the United States to study for college have to get. But I realize that that's the same visa that I will have to try and apply for.
mhm,
Went through that change of status process and remember being really stressed throughout that entire waiting period. Whether or not I'd be rejected for that visa, would have to, like what Mohil shared, have to self-deport for a time period. Fortunately, was able to get my change of status approved and was able to complete my bachelor's degree. And around that time, I was also accepted to the University of Utah's med school. So I'm currently now a third year medical student at the U's Medical School on my psychiatry rotation as I'm talking to
mhm.
all of you. And my future plans is to, serve my state as a physician here, having
Mhm,
been a physician who is raised here, educated here, and trained in the US, I would
mhm,
ultimately want to, serve Utah as a doctor. And I know in Utah especially, there's a huge rural population that severely lacks access to
mhm,
timely healthcare. And that's where I see my future role, and would love to
mhm,
serve in the future, but don't know if I'd be able to just because once I graduate from med school in about a year's time, I will be facing a similar situation as Mohil, where I will no longer be able to stay on my F1 student visa and will have to figure out a way to get onto the same visa that my dad came to this country on, which is the H1B visa. And we'll have to
mhm.
find a sponsor to, get me this visa. And if I'm not able to get that visa, we'll have to self deport from this country and try to work as a doctor in another country.
And what's really interesting about your story as well as Muhil's story is pharmacist, med student, both H4 dependent, so H1B, of course, large demographic that consumes my content, right? H1B visa holders are folks looking to come to the US on an H1B visa. And a lot of times, when I first became aware of what I would call an H4 dreamer, you can go back to very early on here on my channel. I put out a video about H4 dreamers, but as a whole, it's more about documented dreamers. And that's where, you know, Lauren's story is similar to Deep's story. And it's not just H4 kids that have this issue. There are others that are in an alternate status. Such as, you know, what Lauren's status was, and as well as yours, Deep, which we've told many times here, you know, on the channel, which is an E2 dependent, right? And you know, the E2 dependent is treated no differently than an H4 dependent when it comes to age out and age out protections. And so Lawrence is joining us from Belgium, and he's joining us tonight from Belgium morning, most likely. I haven't done my calculations for him, maybe almost midnight or a little after. But that's because he's had to self-deport. And so, Lawrence, I'd love for you to share your story with everyone. How old were you when you originally come to the U.S. and why you're in Belgium now?
Yeah, so I came to the U.S. when I was 7 years old. We first moved to Massachusetts. My dad was working for a company in Massachusetts, and then we moved shortly after to Missouri, where my dad was working, and then we moved up to Iowa. And that's kind of where we initially wanted to settle. That's where my father, his sister, his brother, they're all named after people in Iowa. I'm named after someone in Iowa. So that's kind of where we ultimately wanted to settle when we moved. And eventually we ending up on the E2 status with my dad opening up his business in North Liberty. During that time, I was dependent on his visa, which, you know, most kids, we don't really think, oh, we're dependent, but we don't really know what that means. And it was kind of when I went to the University of Iowa, and I was getting my bachelor's in computer science, I was starting to realize, well, wait a minute. If I turn 21, then I will have to leave, and I won't finish my degree before I turn 21. So, working with the school there, we ended up deciding that the best course of action, we did it about halfway through my freshman year, and that was apply for F1 status for myself. And I was on an F1 status then through the rest of my college degree, and then I did OPT after that for a year, and then because my field is computer science, that falls under STEM, so I was able to do another 2 years of STEM OPT, during which time my employer was applying for the H1B lottery, which sadly, as a lot of people who are in any kind of lottery realize, is it doesn't always work out your benefit. So a little over a year ago, in July last year, so July of 2022, my STEM OPT expired. I did not have another status to transition into. So I was left with either the option of, like Muhil, going back and completing another education, which in my case would likely have cost me my job, or I would be hopefully temporarily transferred to Belgium and work for the company from Belgium. So that's what I'm doing now while they're trying to find an option to bring me back.
Yeah, and you've gone through what I'd call some of the most unprecedented times in H1B lottery, where we've seen just a crazy amount of registrations over the last several years. Combined, it's somewhere almost the 1.5 million in the last 4 years. Total registrations, which is just an astronomical number when you look at, we're only talking about 85,000 spots annually. You as a STEM, uh, OPT STEM, meaning that you had up to 36 months, right, of work authorization under your OPT STEM in tech, specialty occupation, but yet unable to, be selected, right, and obtain an H1B visa, and thus kind of put in a situation where, do I go back to school or do I maintain my employment with an employer who I've been with for a few years? I really enjoy working with them, and consider what my other options are. Fortunately for you, you had an option to go to Belgium. And there's so many out there that don't. And Lauren, you hit on something else that we talk about a lot too. And that's, and I mentioned it earlier, where there's just this, the parents that are unaware of these protections that are not in place for aging out at age 21, and all of the sudden it becomes like, oh no, I have a problem. So I wanted to go around, with the three of you, and ask each of you, like, when did you realize that you had a problem, that you knew that, like, oh, I'm actually going to go out of status? A lot of folks we've talked to on this channel, it's in their late teens, high school age, where they realize, and a lot it's at the college application standpoint. So, Lawrence, if you'll start us off on that one. When did you realize you had a problem?
Yeah, so my parents were always fairly open about the situation we were in. So because we had, while, in the nearly 18 years that I was in the United States, we had transitioned from a J to an F to an E2. We had some experience with the limitations of each degree, or each visa,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of those applications meant that my parents were, especially my mom and my dad both, were really reading into what everything meant. So they knew when I was in high school,
Mm-hmm.
but then we didn't know the exact ins and outs until I was already in college.
Mm-hmm. Muhil, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, similar story where my parents definitely told us about the issue, but I don't think I understood how much it would affect me until later on. So
Mm-hmm.
when it came time to apply for colleges, I remember having so many conversations with my high school guidance counselor and like going over my eligibility for in-state tuition, financial aid, scholarships, and even admission to, as Mary mentioned, a lot of programs are very selective. And when you're applying as an international student, that can be more difficult. So it was really disheartening because I think that's a time in your life when you feel like you have your entire life ahead of you. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized that I was starting my college career already with so many closed doors. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a hard thing to accept at the time.
You're like, wait, I'm an international student. What does that even mean, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's pretty common in terms of when most have come to that conclusion. Mary, what about you?
I think I may have been a little later. I It wasn't until maybe my second year in college when I really realized the implications of what it means to be an international student. Just because when I was, getting accepted to the University of Utah and when I was enrolling in my freshman year, I didn't encounter much problems with enrollment or, tuition and opportunities my first year. However, after my first year, I decided to apply for an RA position on campus. And that's when, again, my visa status came into question and didn't allow me to kind of finish up the employment paperwork. And that's when I had to sit down with my parents and we were like, yeah, this is sort of what that means in the next coming years. It means that, by the time you hit your junior year, you'll now have to figure out a new visa that you need to stay on so you can complete your degree. And I feel like some more and more schools are becoming aware of this issue, but at the time, even like my international student office at my school wasn't very familiar with this process and the aging out issue, so they weren't able to support me in that regard until I found this community at Improve the Dream. I kind of felt like I was going through all of this on my own.
Hmm. Yeah. Another common theme is that I didn't realize that there were hundreds of thousands of us that existed, right? Which kind of leads into the next question, and we've talked about this a lot here on the channel. Is a consistent question because the 21st birthday in America for American kids is pretty significant. It has some significance behind it, and it's generally one of the birthdays outside of 1821 pretty widely celebrated. But for documented dreamers who are aging out, it's not. And so, what was that time for you, Mary, leading up to your 21st birthday, and how did you and your family handle it?
Yeah, I think leading up to my 21st birthday, we were still waiting to hear back about whether or not my change of status or the adjustment of status was approved. And my birthday's in December as well. And so there's a lot of like festivities that we celebrate at home together as a family related to
Mm,
Christmas, whether that be at church or, coming together to build our nativity set at home. And I just remember, like, I have 2 younger siblings, and both of them were so scared and worried that they wouldn't be able to spend another Christmas with their older sister in case, my change of status was not approved, and I would have to return to a country that I'd not lived in since I was, like, 3 months old. So
mhm,
there was just a lot of dread and anxiety, amongst me and my siblings, and also, like, my parents felt like they didn't know what to do either, right? I mean, they felt as though when they moved our entire family to Utah, came here for a brighter future, for a better future for us kids, and to feel like, their eldest child may have to leave them and may not be able to realize that better future that they had in mind was really devastating for them as well.
mhm. Lawrence, what about you? What was it like for you and your family leading up to your 21st birthday?
So my birthday's in the summer, and it was when I turned 21. It was the summer before my senior year, um, and at that time, I knew it was my last year of my F status because I was already on the F status. But at the time, I didn't have anything lined up for um, an internship. For or OPT for the next year yet because I didn't have an internship that I was doing. So um, that was kind of we know it's at least one more year about, but after that it was just kind of unknown at the time. So it really was one of those. It could be the last one that we
Mhm,
celebrated together, and luckily that ended up not being until my 24th birthday. But
mhm.
um, yeah.
And Muhil, what about you?
Yeah, similar story here. I was also waiting for my H4 application, H4 to F1 change of status application to be approved. So it was a very stressful time to say the very least. I remember taking calls with my lawyers in between exams and just spending a lot of time with my international advisor's office. I also was unable to renew my driver's license, which was challenging because I was a commuter at the time. So my parents had to take time out of their busy schedules to drop me off and pick me up from school every day, which was also an additional obstacle. And like really, like you lose your dependent status at 21 because you're considered an adult, right? But I
Mhm,
felt more dependent on my parents than ever before. Like I felt like there were so many things that I could not do. So it really was such a relief when finally my H4 to F1 was approved, but it was a long and difficult process.
mhm. Yep, and that's again kind of a consistent theme that we've had here from other documented dreamers that we've met is this dread and going through the change of status and waiting on that approval and kind of the lingering effects of that. So, Muhil, we'll start with you on this one. How'd you hear about Improve the Dream?
Sure. So my parents have always been a great support system. So even if it was not me, they were always like looking for resources that could possibly help me. So my mom came across a few articles about Improve the Dream, so she encouraged me to reach out. So I signed up, and immediately I had the opportunity to sit down with Deep and talk about my story, hear his story. So, and then I joined the group, and it was really such a relief to finally be in a community of people who know exactly what you're going through, and to know
Mhm.
that at any time you can reach out for advice, and I can also help other people out too who are going through the same thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's the community aspect of what, ITD does, right? Mary, what about you?
Yeah, very similar sort of picture. I think it was both my parents have been watching kind of YouTube videos like this,
Mhm.
podcasts like this about visa status and green card updates, and stumbled upon, I think maybe it might have been Deep sharing about Improve the Dream, or someone
Mhm.
else mentioning this community, and shared this support system to me, which has been really helpful since I found this community too.
That's awesome. And Lawrence, yourself?
Yeah, kind of the similar story. My dad, I think, was in a support group on Facebook, or kind of like a community group on Facebook for E2 visa holders.
Mhm.
And in there, they had kind of a highlighted post about Improve the Dream, um, as I think one of the group admins was going through some visa struggles themselves and had posted about it. So
Mm. Power of social media, right? And the reach of technology. Um, so Mary, let's start with you on this one. Why come on here tonight and tell your story?
Um, for the longest time, for children in this position, for documented dreamers in this boat, it can feel really isolating and feel like you're the only one in this situation. No one else in your friend group might get you. People in your university may not understand, your visa struggles. And so the way that I felt less alone was by, hearing stories from other documentary dreamers who posted about it on Instagram or came on podcasts or YouTube shows and shared about their stories. So I feel like just sharing about the experiences that we've gone through, and knowing that there is a community and advocacy group like Improve the Dream, you know, um, fighting for rights of documented dreamers and fighting to make policy changes so that we can end aging out, is really, it makes the situation seem less bleak, and helps us feel like there is something that we can do and something that we can look forward to.
Hmm. Mahil, what about you? Why come on here today and tell your story?
Yeah, I think for me, after joining Improve the Dream, it was very clear that storytelling is the center of the advocacy work. It
Hmm.
really does it really does wonders for like garnering support from the community and just like raising awareness about the issue. And then also, it's really nice to always hear stories from other documented dreamers like Mary, Lawrence, and Deep. Just hearing from them
Hmm.
is always inspiring because it motivates me to like continue working hard. Like there are so many struggles that we go through, but we're going through them together. And
Hmm.
then also, Rob, like I've been following your platform as well. Recently I went through the H1B process myself. So I
Hmm.
was really glad to have an opportunity to be here. And also thank you for all the work that you do to support the community as well.
No, my privilege, and I appreciate those kind words. But this is one of the things for me very early on. Wanted to make sure that there are a few pieces of advocacy that I'm very passionate about. This is one of them. Um, we'll talk about the others as well, kind of throughout the course of it. But this is absolutely one of them because for almost 20 years, as long as you've been in the country, I've been talking to H1Bs who had no idea that this was an issue. And so this is something where it's, for me, I want to get this out into more the mainstream, meaning mainstream American eyes, folks that I know in the staffing world that follow my content and keep up with what I do, and the technology and staffing world. So it's very important to me as well. So I appreciate those kind words. Lawrence, let's close it out with you. Why come on and tell your story?
well, there's always people who are able to say, this is my story, and this is what I'm going through, and this is what might happen, this is what could happen, these are the what ifs. But in my case, it did happen. I did age out, and I did not have a status to go on, and I did have to leave the country after spending
Mhm.
almost 2 decades in the country. And I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I'm able to speak the language of the country I'm going back to and know the culture fairly well. But many people don't have that
Mhm.
opportunity. So face having somebody faced with the reality that this isn't a solely what if situation for people. It is an actual reality that this happens to people.
Mhm.
That's, I think, also very important to highlight.
Right, and, yours is unique, Deep's is unique, Muhil's is unique, Mary's is unique, and the list of, um, over a dozen documented dreamers that we've now highlighted on this channel. In fact, we probably are close to the 20s if I would go back and count. But that's a fraction of the 200,000 plus. And I think that's the thing that can't be missed. Just wanted to ask everyone again, if you're not already subscribed to the H1B Guy channel, please go ahead and subscribe. Like this video so that we can help get this out to a more mass audience. If you have questions or comments, I know a lot of you are putting them in the chat right now. Please go ahead, drop those in there. I wanted to highlight this really quickly. I put it in the chat, but for any documented dreamers that may be tuning in for the first time and have never heard of Improve the Dream, or if you are a parent of a documented dreamer, please go to improvethedream.org. I guess that's /survey, and fill out that form so that they can become part of the Improve the Dream community. So Deep, you've been very quiet, man. I want to turn it over to you, and if we can get an Improve the Dream update. I know that there's been a lot going on. Um, you know, Folks are looking for us to talk about the update from USCIS on CSPA, the clarification from earlier in the year, from February, that's referring to locking in dates for filing, and maybe just an overall update on what's been going on behind the scenes that Improved the Dream, because it's almost been 2 years since you've been on. So, what's been going on at ITD?
Thanks, Rob. I just want to start off by saying I'm so thankful for Mary, Lawrence, and Muhil for joining today to share their stories as well, because everything we've been able to accomplish has been because of storytelling, and all of the actions that we're going to talk about that USCIS is taking, and the bill that we've been able to get introduced and get it as far as we have. It's because of the stories that we've been able to tell to the public and to the change makers, the lawmakers. So I think that's really important. And the more stories that we can get told, the more people that we can find that are in this situation, willing to share their stories, the bigger that we can grow the movement to finally get the permanent change that we need. So thank you again. I think what I want to start off with is going over what's been happening with the legislation. So America's Children Act, which was introduced last Congress for the first time. It's a bill that permanently fixes the situation. It ends aging out by doing a few different things, but essentially it would give a path to citizenship for every child of a visa holder who grows up in this country. And then it also has age out protections that puts in place policies where people no longer would age out just because they're in this long green card backlog. It also allows work authorizations and fixes some of those loopholes. So that's something that last year we were able to make it one of the most bipartisan immigration bills in Congress. And again, this year it was reintroduced earlier this summer. And it's now the most bipartisan immigration bill in both the House and the Senate. Which I think is an amazing feat that we've been able to achieve with a divided Congress. So I think that's something that we can see that it is getting support, but we need to keep working hard, get more stories told, get more members of Congress supporting this to take it to the finish line. Mm-hmm. And then also at the end of last year, we came very close in getting a part of America's Children Act into law. It had passed as in the NDAA, in the House NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act, which Congress passes every year. And unfortunately, at the last moment in the Senate, it was taken out. and was not able to be signed into law. And a similar effort has happened this year as well, which we're still fighting for, both as a part of really any end of the year package, whether it's like the spending bill or whatever else there may be.
Mm-hmm.
But really, our advocacy effort to Congress collectively is to make sure whatever we can get passed in whatever possible legislative vehicle we're able to do. And I think it's very important to continue advocating for that bill. And I know we're going to go over it in a little bit, but we had a very successful advocacy trip just a couple of months ago in May, where nearly 40 documented dreamers from across the country came to DC. And over the span of 3 full days, we were able to get somewhere between 150 and 200 total meetings with congressional offices. And I think continuing to do that is really making a difference. Continuing to have the support of the families, friends of impacted individuals who are making phone calls and sharing this issue in their communities is what's helping us grow this community. So I'm really thankful to everyone for their help in that as well. As far as on the administrative side, we're hoping to, as we've talked before, there's a few different actions that the administration can really take to protect children from aging out. And some of those, we've been fighting for the longest time. For example, DACA, which helps children of undocumented immigrants who grew up in this country, gives protection, work authorization. That has always excluded documented dreamers. And we have been trying to get that to include documented dreamers. Unfortunately, that was not able to happen, but we're still fighting for a similar thing, a similar deferred action policy to come forth for children of visa holders. And that's something we're still pushing for, but has not yet happened. There's a few other actions, such as a compelling circumstances EAD, which we're very hopeful will happen, because we've been pushing really hard on that. There's been administrative letters that we've worked on with members of Congress where we've had dozens sign on. And then there's another one that we're doing very soon with these asks to the administration. And that puts pressure on the administration to act when there's dozens of members of Congress who care about this, who've heard from their constituents, and then it helps push these actions to happen. So the compelling circumstance EAD is one that if you're a child of a visa holder, who had a pending green card application but ages out, it would say that it would define that situation occurring as a compelling circumstance and allow that individual to extend their status and get an EAD. That's something the administration does have an authority to do, and we're hopeful they can put that in place soon. Something else that we've been fighting for is a priority date retention policy, which would ensure that children who age out don't have to be, go all the way in the back of the line if, for example, their parents end up getting a green card and sponsor them for an F2B, which can have like nearly a decade wait time. So that's a policy that actually the Supreme Court back in 2014 ruled that the administration, has the authority of kind of interpreting, because the law is very vague. So that's something that I think would significantly help a lot of documented dreamers. And I'm hopeful that in the near future, it can be something that can be changed. But those are things that we're fighting for that would impact a broader group of people. But we did have some good news earlier this year when one of the lowest hanging fruits, I think, of our administrative ask, which was making sure that the dates for filing chart was used to freeze a child's age instead of the final action date chart. That was adopted earlier this year. USCIS announced that. It was earlier in February, and it's a policy that's actually helped dozens of people in the Improve the Dream community already, and they're going to be able to get their green card. So it's a very life-changing moment for the people it's helped. And I think it's obviously important to recognize that it's still a very small change that's helping maybe a couple thousand people out of over 200,000, but it's a very impactful change for those it does help. So back then, when they made that change, unfortunately, there was a loophole in that, even in that policy change. And I think it's something that us as immigrants we as immigrants have come to expect. Even when there's things being fixed, there's going to be loopholes within loopholes. So when they made that update in February, they left out people who would have qualified, but they never actually applied because that wasn't the policy originally, right? So there's a lot of people who technically would have had their age frozen based on the dates for filing, but they never filed an adjustment of status based on that. So, that's probably the vast majority of people we were intending to help with that policy change. And thankfully, the administration did issue another update today clarifying that they will waive the requirement of filing for like an adjustment of status if you were in that situation because of this policy change, which would mean that anyone who would have been able to file an adjustment of status with the dates for filing chart current should be able to do that. They should be able to do a motion to reopen and then claim this as an extraordinary circumstance and hopefully be able to get their green card with that file reopened. And I think that this is going to help at least a few thousand documented dreamers, which is very significant and life-changing for those individuals.
It is, and I think we've talked about this a good bit, and I'm assuming it's still approximately around 10,000 documented dreamers that are self-deporting annually. Is that number still accurate?
That's correct. Yes, approximately 10,000 face self-deportation every year.
Yeah, so if we can protect a couple of thousand, even, right? You drastically reduce a percentage, and some of this is just common sense type reform. And I wanted to, I'm pretty low tech here, so if you guys will bear with me, I'm going to pull up some photos of you guys on the Hill back from May, I believe this was, with really one of your champions, a couple of your champions, but really Rep Ross out of the Raleigh-Durham RTP area, which a lot of folks consume my content from that area. So definitely good to have a champion for this cause in RTP, and I know she's been really a huge advocate on the bipartisan front for you guys as well. So I'm going to share the slideshow if you will.
Yeah, Rob, I'll just echo what you said. Representative Deborah Ross has been an absolute champion. And I think from the start, you may remember me saying, we've obviously been advocating for a long time, but until a few years ago, we didn't really have a champion. And that was with Representative Deborah Ross. And then we've also had Representative Miller Meeks, a Republican from Iowa. And again, that's been able to happen because they've become champions because we've had so many people in their districts share their stories. Lawrence is a constituent of Representative Miller Meeks. Perrine's a constituent of Miller Meeks. And, so having constituents have those stories told, it just shows that's why storytelling is so important. And it really makes a difference.
So I'm going to share this slideshow really quickly. Just pull it up and share a few of these photos that you shared with me from your trip. I think you'll recognize some of the familiar faces here. So get this up. All right. So I see Rep Kana there, it looks like. There's Lawrence. I see you.
Oh, that's Barra, Representative Barra and Ross. And just to highlight, it was a three-day trip. We had multiple administrative meetings and meetings with senators, Durbin, Padilla, Grassley, members of Congress, on both parties. And we were able to really get lots of stories told. Not only those that were there. We had some individuals join virtually, and obviously retelling stories of other individuals that have had to self-deport. So I think it was a very impactful trip for us, being able to have nearly 200 meetings over the span of 3 days, which it really makes a difference because from the start, from the get-go, we had I think by the time we left that trip, we had 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats on the House America's Children Act, which is amazing. I don't think there is another immigration bill this year that has that sort of
No,
support.
I know that there's not.
Yeah.
And so, boots on the ground, power in numbers, right? A collective effort from Improve the Dream this is where, look, you're not there, but very clearly the message is being heard. The storytelling is being heard, because they're not, these aren't fictional stories, right? This is real life, real people, and I think you're seeing that. It's one of these things where it's common sense, and just really excited to see what happens, whether it's included as an add-on, whether it finds its way as a standalone, or whether we're talking about some larger piece of comprehensive immigration reform. Having the language that you have and doing whatever you can to get it included in whatever manner you can is absolutely something you're going to continue to do, and not going to stop until you get to where you're trying to get to, which is protections. And so, kudos to you to see, how quickly this has gone from a very small collective effort to, the organization that it is now. And that's kudos to you, to your team, folks like Perrine and Anag, who we've talked about. It's been on the channel a few times as well, that are leading those efforts behind the scenes, and just excited, but also optimistic, right? Because we're not there yet. And quite honestly, immigration has been a back burner subject in the political landscape now for the better part of really 3+ years. And that's something that I think has to change. And I know you guys are working very closely to do that. So I've got a announcement that I'd like to make here tonight as part of your advocacy. One of the things way back when, Deep, when you and I first met, I was very bullish on you getting set up as a nonprofit 503c so that you could fund advocacy for individuals who may not be able to get boots on the ground in DC, right? Because we're talking about a lot of college students for the most part when we look at F1s that are faced with aging out. So up on the screen, you'll see I'm going to share a link to improvethedream.org/donate. And so if you're joining the stream and you've not contributed to Improve the Dream, here is my ask for you to do that now. If you're watching or listening to this at a later date, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and cue that URL in your browser and contribute as little as $5 to the cause. What that cause funds is for individuals who cannot financially afford to go and advocate when it is time, like the team did in May. And to put my money where my mouth is, tomorrow morning, I will be depositing a $500 donation to the team at Improve the Dream, because I want to make sure that we get more boots on the ground.
Rob, I just want to say, thank you for stating that, and that means a lot. Your support, and really your support in sharing these stories and being able to even just connect our stories with a wider audience, and but that really does help a lot. And just wanted to share, this past year when we did this trip, any contributions that we were able to have that really helped individuals who, mostly college students or some high school students, be able to come on the trip when otherwise they may not have been able to. So that it's it really does help significantly, and really appreciate that.
And again, it's improvethedream.org/donate. And I want to make sure that I clarify. One, this was unprompted, was absolutely my decision. In fact, I had to let Deep know that I was going to be asking my viewers for their money. So please, as little as $5 can help send a dreamer, documented dreamer, to DC on their next advocacy trip. And I know that that's still in the works, Deep. We don't have anything scheduled, but more than happy to communicate that out as that comes up to the forefront. But again, putting my money where my mouth is, as I told you I would do 2 years ago, and just really excited to see what you guys do. So let's do this. We've got about 9-ish minutes here. We've got a ton of questions that are in the chat. One of the things that I'm seeing as kind of a common theme here is my kid is turning 21 in the next 2 years. What are his options?
So for people that are turning 21 soon, for the most part, it's going to be a little bit individualized. Some individuals, I think it's better to change to an F1 status a little bit sooner, depending on the requirements. Just as an example, I had to change to an F1 when I was 19 because I was going to pharmacy school, and to be able to get the licensing that I needed to work at a hospital, I needed to be on a student visa and obtain a social security number. So that could kind of impact, but in the most cases, when children who are aging out are turning 21, the international student visa is going to be their next step to move on to. Things have gotten better over the last few years. It used to be where a change of status to an F1 was like one of the worst nightmares I think that a documented dreamer could have to go through, and it still is. It's, I mean, you know, having to even go through that process itself is, but we've been able to actually through our advocacy as well be able to remove a few of the red tapes that were in the way, and now there's also premium processing available to avoid certain delays. So for the most part, that is going to be the next step. But I would encourage him to take the Improve the Dream survey and reach out, and we can definitely connect and see how we can help for the individualized case.
And it's interesting that you mentioned H4 to F1, because a little further down there was a question of, can you go from F1 back to H4? And I think that may be something that, you know, depending on who you talk to, may be advised against. Are you aware of anyone that's done that? Because I personally am not, if I'm being really honest.
I think there are a couple people that I remember from a couple of years back that had reached out and they did that. I wouldn't be able to remember the exact particulars of the situation, but I do know there are people who have done that. I've had a lot of people ask, I know there's, if you switch over to an F1, can you still qualify, for the underlying petition for the green card? And that definitely you can, as long as your CISPA age still qualifies one. So I don't know if that's what the thinking was, but in general, yes, by the law, they should be able to, but obviously clarifying that with the attorney.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't provide legal advice here. These are merely our own opinions for your entertainment and own personal use. Hyperion in the chat says a switch from H4 to F1 in January of 2020 would have aged out April 2020. His parents got their green card in July of 2021. Not close enough. So many stories like that. That's a very common
story. I would actually, for that comment right there, I would just double check with this change, that USCIS change that we're talking about. You potentially may be helped by this change that, we mentioned that USCIS was able to make, because the whole point of that change was what USCIS used to do is that like your age would be frozen when the final action date would become current, like when that final action date chart is current. But oftentimes the dates for filing chart could be current, at least months, if not over a year prior to when the final action date becomes current. And I do know like around that time, around 2020, a lot of dates, at least the dates for filing were advancing. So I would just, try to go and see like what those dates were, when those dates became current, and potentially if you can qualify based on that change.
Appreciate you sharing that, because that's one where that's a good to know, right? Could potentially, based on the clarification, benefit from that.
And really the intent, just as another clarification on this, because I know a lot of people were interested in like knowing more about like what that's doing. The intent behind that rule is essentially anyone who either did apply for adjustment of status or could have applied for adjustment of status based on a dates for filing chart being current, should be able to do it. So if you could have done that at any point in time and said that you would have been 21 or under, so CISPA age being 21 or under, you could technically be over 21 if you take into account like the number of days that your I-140 was pending. So if your CISPA age was 21 or under at the time of a visa bulletin for the dates for filing chart being current, the intent is for you to be able to qualify for this change. So definitely, seek advice from an attorney, do the motion to reopen if you're able to. And, if there's definitely reach out, like if there's any feedback that you get, or if someone says you can't qualify, or if USCIS rejects your case, I think that's something we definitely want to flag really individually to the highest if people are getting denied. So
let's take maybe one more question here, Deep. I've got this one is interesting. What's the earliest my H4 child can convert to F1 so that they can do internships or jobs? Currently 18 and in college. Will converting early affect the existing family green card process?
So converting to the F1 should not affect the green card process. And then they should be, if they're in college, they can convert. So typically once they get accepted to college, I think it's 30 days before they should be able to, but if they're already in college and they're wanting to do internships and jobs, switching over to the F1 would make sense.
I've got two more I want to get to that just came in that I think you can help here as well. Parents just got their file action date, October 2021, turned 22 a month before. They got their green card in June of 2022. Are they qualified under the CSPA update that came out today?
So Sri Harini said, okay, so honestly, it's kind of hard. I think just based on the information there, it's unclear. I think what you would have to do is kind of go back through the visa bulletins and see if any of those essentially
for filing.
When was the date that your CISPA age became 21, and then look at the visa bulletins prior to that to see if any of those dates for filing were current, and that would be like a starting place.
A good starting point. Yep, yeah, great advice there.
Yeah.
And then let's do this last one here. If parents have filed for I-45 and EB2 and EB3, and parents got it through EB3, can they use EB2 to file for the I-485?
So if the EB2, if at any time that they did have the EB2, if at any time they did have the EB2, like they hadn't switched to EB3, the dates for filing became current, I think you can utilize the update and the clarification they're giving to say you would have filed back then. But I think like if the dates never became current under the EB2 and then they switched to EB3, I think you'd have to go from the EB3. That's kind of my understanding. And just to kind of answer that final question and the priority date retention, I think it's one of the most important policy changes they can make administratively, which we know 100% they can do. And I think it can happen sometime in the next, hopefully in the next few months, but I would say in the next year, I feel confident that we can get them to make that change. But it's something that we've definitely been advocating for. So at least those individuals who aged out, but parents were able to get a green card, they're able to, yeah.
So, one of the things that always comes up, and I want to address this as we close out, and that is the advocacy that I was referring to earlier. There's two other things that I'm pretty bullish on, and that is H1B visas for U.S. educated that hold a full-time employment role. Whether we look at that through lottery or some sort of H1B EAD. The other is the 7% quota on employment-based green cards for country of origin. The issue with that is it primarily impacts two countries. India and China are the ones that are primarily impacted by that. But as we've seen with the visa bulletin this year, we've seen priority dates for all chargeability, which is rest of world countries. And so, ultimately, as I've talked about many times here on this platform, I'm in favor of a first come, first serve, have been for a long time. I'm also in favor of a merit-based immigration system. But what that does is it doesn't necessarily solve problems for all documented dreamers. And that's the thing that needs to be clarified, is that individuals like Deep and Lawrence would not be protected through that same path. It's just not how it works. And so ultimately, yes, there is a root cause to the situation for the H4 kids. There is. There absolutely is. And we can't run from that. And Deep, you've never run from it either. There's been many times over that you've highlighted in mainstream media. And so from my perspective, it's foolish to bring it up, because ultimately this issue is separate when we look at documented dreamers as a whole. And so I will leave it at that. Ultimately, for me, yes, I am in favor of removing that quota on country caps for employment-based preferences. But when we look at protections for aging out, for legal childhood arrivals, it isn't just about H1Bs. And that's the thing that makes Improve the Dream as a whole very unique, is that because it's inclusive of all documented dreamers. And so I just wanted to make sure before we close out, I know we're right at the hour mark, a little over that, but I wanted to make sure that that point was understood and that everyone knows where I stand, in my opinion, on that. So before we close out, Muhil, Mary, Lawrence, I want to thank the three of you very much for coming here on today, sharing your story. I know the first part was you guys and a lot of updates from Deep and Improve the Dream and what's been going on with the America's Children's Act. But this format works because we need to tell your stories in order to talk about why the advocacy is so important. And so, Muhil, I wanted to give you an opportunity to close out tonight before we log off here.
Thank you, Rob. I just want to thank you again for giving us the opportunity to come on today to share our stories, and thanks to Deep for sharing all the updates. There's definitely been a lot going on. I know for us, sometimes it's hard to keep up with everything. So thank you for sharing the updates. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much again. Mary, what about you? Anything you'd like to say before we close out?
No, really appreciate everyone who took the time to listen today and have been supporting Improve the Dream, including you, Rob. We really appreciate all the support and hard work.
Thank you so much. It means a lot. Lawrence, what about you?
I think it's going to sound like an echoing board, but really appreciate you having us on and letting us share our stories, and everyone else for listening into the stories and hopefully sharing what you've heard and kind of taking that feeling of our stories and applying it and taking a look at it through our eyes and seeing, that this is effective.
Absolutely. That's why you're in Belgium, right? And, joining us from across the pond, right? So,
Hmm.
Deep, what about you? Anything you'd like to add before we close out here tonight?
I'll just say our collective goal is to permanently end aging out, and every small change that we can get, whether it's 1,000 or 2,000 people to help, we want to do that. But we won't stop fighting for this until everyone's protected and no one else has to age out and face self-deportation again.
Yep. And again, just a reminder, if you are a parent of a documented dreamer or you are a documented dreamer, improvethedream.org/survey. And one last call, improvethedream.org/donate. As little as $5 can help send a documented dreamer to go advocate on the Hill, as you saw in the slideshow, as Lawrence and Muhil and Mary had an opportunity to join Deep, and dozens of other documented dreamers. And that's an experience I know that you all will never forget. And ultimately, I hope that we don't have to continue to repeat it to get this thing across the finish line here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out tonight. And I just wanted to remind everyone, I'm very thankful that these live streams are brought to you by our sponsors, Syndesis and Path to Canada, the ideal plan B for high skilled immigrants currently located in the U.S. whose status may be uncertain. If you're facing an H1B denial or OPT expiration, don't get caught off guard. Make sure you have a plan B, and Syndesis and Path to Canada are your answers. By perm-ads.com, the industry leader in providing a seamless experience for employers and immigration attorneys navigating the complex perm recruitment ad phase of the labor certification process. If you're looking to reduce your costs and overhead associated with perm labor certification recruitment advertising, let perm-ads.com help you. And also by Mob Squad. Are you a technology professional facing U.S. work visa-related challenges? Don't leave your fate up to chance. Our partner, Mob Squad, has the solution. Whether you're looking to stay working with your current U.S. company or you want to find a new opportunity in Canada, please find out how the team at Mob Squad can help you via the link in the video description below. Join the squad. Wanted to ask you one last time, please like this live stream. Make sure you're subscribed to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube and click the bell for notifications so that you're notified anytime we post new content here on this platform or we go live like we did here on Thursday, August 24th, 2023. For those of you who have stayed with us this long or anyone who joined us over the last hour plus, just want to say thank you so much. We really appreciate your support for hearing these stories, for getting these updates, and for most importantly, supporting documented dreamers and their efforts to end age out protection and create age out protections, I should say. So with that being said, I'm Robert. I'm the H1B Guy, your global source for all things